Growing up in the sleepy contours of our village, life moved at a pace dictated by the seasons and the sun's measured path across the sky. As a child, I'd wake to the chorus of cicadas in the summer and the distant call of a rooster signaling the dawn. The community was a patchwork of lives woven by shared roots and history, where stories from one household would spill over into the next, mingling like the sweet scent of honeysuckle on a warm breeze. The land itself seemed to hold memories in the cracks of weathered wood and the whispering sway of the tall pines. Each home was like a character in a living tale, bearing witness to births, marriages, and departures. The older folks would reminisce about days when life was simpler, back when the Hendersons' farm was the pride of the county. I remember Mr. Henderson well, a tall, wiry man with a permanent tan and a worn hat that had seen as many seasons as his crops. His farm was vast, with its imposing two-story house painted in a white that had long since faded to the gray of old age. He kept livestock in the barn and grew enough crops to sustain both his family and sell at the market. But time does what it does best. It wore him down. And when his daughters packed up and left for lives far from the cloying embrace of small-town expectations, he found himself alone, burdened by more land than he could care for. The day he decided to sell marked the beginning of a shift that everyone in town felt, even if they wouldn't say it outright. Some whispered that he was stubborn moving south, despite his children who feared he'd chip away at their future wealth. I found it funny, the idea of him rebelliously selling the property just to live on his own terms. My aunt never wanted to let an opportunity pass to show her disdain for pretension, often mocked those daughters for being too proud and disconnected from the life that raised them. It was the old Southern way to scoff at airs and graces that didn't fit into the weathered frame of our lives. So when I learned the Henderson place had new owners, a mixture of curiosity and unease settled in me. The talk around town was that the buyers were Yankees, a loaded term that carried with it a blend of suspicion and reluctant intrigue. The only certainty was that they had money enough to afford a 212-acre farm that had seen better days, but who they were and what they intended remained a mystery, one that had everyone leaning over fence and whispering theories. I met her by chance. Her Cadillac was parked on the roadside, steam rising from the hood. I stopped as any neighbor would. She sat inside, looking panicked, refusing to roll down her window, just staring at me. The rain was falling steadily and the temperature was dropping, so I left and drove up Henderson Hill, where cell service worked, to call the sheriff. "Well, why didn't you help her?" Wendell asked when I reached him. "I tried, but she wouldn't open the door," I replied. "Then go back and do something," Wendell urged. "Fine, let me grab my slicker. It's cold and dark, and she's terrified," I said. "Take some barbecue to the station while you're at it," Wendell added. "There are buns and salad, too. Do you have any baked beans?" "I'll be there in 10 minutes. Does the cake have frosting?" I asked. 20 minutes later, Wendell and I drove back to where her car was. She was crying. Wendell approached her car and identified himself, and finally, she rolled down the window. "Do you need help, ma'am?" Wendell asked gently. "Yes, please." Smoke started coming out, and I couldn't reach anyone, she said, her voice trembling. "Will found you earlier. Let him check the hood," Wendell assured her. I leaned in and took a quick look under the hood. "You need a new radiator hose," I said. "Call Tria when Wendell takes you home. Billy's out of town for a wedding, so they won't be able to fix it until Tuesday." Wendell noted this, which made her expression shift to panic. "I can't leave it here. My husband would be furious," she said anxiously. Wen suggested I take her trailer and haul it for her. It was late, cold, and raining, but I agreed. "I'll park it at my lot, safe behind the fence." "Thank you. We'll pay whatever you charge," Mrs. Hatfield said as Wendell left to handle a wreck on Route 12. "Mrs. Hatfield, are you ready?" I asked, now that she had introduced herself. I drove her home, noting her quiet, distant demeanor. She and her husband owned the Henderson place, but the house stood dark as we approached. "Why are there no lights on?" I asked. "The power's out. Didn't you notice how dark it was outside?" she responded. "Do you have a flashlight?" I inquired. "No, I don't," she admitted. "Well, you'll need one living in this area." Mr. Henderson had a generator. You should check if it's still connected to the power grid, I advised. She was fortunate the generator was still there, running albeit weakly. It was a large diesel unit, chugging loudly with enough fuel to last for about 4 hours. If it holds up, you'll be fine until the power comes back. They usually don't cut it for long around this time of year. I'd suggest adjusting it and buying a barrel of diesel as backup, I said. She nodded, jotting down the details. I'll go retrieve your car. Here's my card with the address of the lot. If you need anything before your husband returns, don't hesitate to call me. Good night, Mrs. Hatfield, I added. I can't thank you enough, she said, her gratitude evident. It's no problem, good night, I replied. I left after making sure she was safe, then called Sherry, knowing she would be worried. Where have you been? Why didn't you call? I missed you, Sherry said, her concern clear. Sorry, I got a call from the police. Billy's away, and they asked me to help move a car. I'll be home in an hour and a half, I explained. Make sure they appreciate you working in this weather, she said. Money was always on her mind, despite her parents' wealth and our decent situation. She'd only started acting that way about a year ago, and I never knew why. I got the trailer towed, the car, and was home as promised. Sherry had gone to bed, leaving a note about dinner in the microwave. After eating and a quick shower, I crashed until morning. The sun was out, making the previous cold rain easy to forget. With little ado at the store, I picked up a new hose, unloaded the car, and fixed it around lunch. A man in a suit came in, looking concerned. I'm Bennett Hatfield. I need to arrange for my wife's car to be towed. Can you recommend a mechanic? He asked. Charlie, my assistant, our business focused on renting heavy equipment, and the economic downturn had actually boosted us, as more people did their own work. Charlie gestured toward me, and Bennett walked over and extended his hand. I'm Ol McCoy, I said, smirking. As me, the costume handler, giggled behind us, Sherry said, Sorry, Mr. Hatfield, trying to suppress her laughter. We're not laughing at you, just the whole Hatfield and McCoy thing. Bennett smiled in understanding. Hope we're not feuding, he said. I left my tool in Philadelphia, Bennett joked. Mine's a plowshare now, I replied. What do you need? I asked. I'm looking for a mechanic, he said. No worries, I assured him. I fixed it this morning. It just needed a new hose and some antifreeze. Your wife can pick it up before 6. Bennett looked surprised. How much do I owe you? He asked. $40, the receipt's in the glove box, I said. That doesn't seem right, he replied. It is. I don't charge for labor, we're neighbors, I explained. You live on Henderson Road, and I'm on Howell. Neighbors help each other for free. He looked confused, so I added, if you rented equipment, I'd charge. If I needed legal advice, I'd pay. But small favors are just that, small. He nodded slowly. It'll take some getting used to, but thank you, he said. About 45 minutes later, Bennett returned with his wife. She was more attractive and younger than I expected, probably around 40, but looking closer to 30. It seemed that luxury living suited her well. Bennett left her there, likely caught up with work, and she turned to thank me repeatedly. That's enough, Mrs. Hatfield, I said, cutting her off gently. It's no big deal. Call me Angie. It's a big deal where I'm from. She smiled and shook hands with Mara and Charlie, who were curious about her. Instead of leaving, Angie asked for a tour, showing particular interest in the party supplies, especially the castle. A large turreted circus tent I'd bought cheaply at an auction. It was perfect for weddings and could transform a field into a fairy tale setting overnight. Sherry was restless again, wanting a new Cadillac like the one Angie had. Her 2-year-old Chevy Impala no longer seemed good enough. I reminded her that if we bought the Cadillac, we wouldn't be able to trade it in for 4 years, something she had dismissed when we first bought the Impala. It's practically worn out, she complained. It only has 39,000 miles on it, I said. I need a new car. Why are we arguing about this? She pressed. Because you don't need one. You just want it. We can't keep trying to match what our neighbors have. Angie's husband is a lawyer. Your car is perfectly fine. If you really want a new one, buy it yourself. But my name won't be on the paperwork, I said firmly. I knew she couldn't do that, Her credit was a mess before we got married. She had defaulted on a car loan and run up credit card debt. I helped her with the car loan but refused to cover her credit card debt. I didn't trust credit cards. They were financial traps, I explained. But you have 2 credit cards, she pointed out. They're for business, I said. The MX is for occasional use, and the other one I use just twice a year to keep it active, mainly for equipment deals. I made sure sign a prenup to keep my house and business separate. My parents own a house but moved to California, leaving it to me, although the transfer wasn't formalized. Sherry thought it was, and I never mentioned it, as all the paperwork was prepared just in case. I started my business after doing subcontract work and getting tired of driving 45 miles for equipment. I used my savings, borrowed from my parents, and invested heavily for 3 years, buying equipment and reinvesting profits. By the 4th year, I repaid my parents. When I met Sherry, I was proud of what I'd built and determined to protect it. We met at a Christmas party hosted by a contractor I worked with often. Normally, I avoided such events, but I was bored that night. The room was full of well-dressed, beautiful women, and I danced, flirted, and enjoyed myself. Sherry was there with someone else, but we shared a dance, feeling a spark. I didn't pursue it, since she wasn't alone. As I left, the hostess slipped me a note. "Call her," she whispered before walking away. It was Sherry's number, but with the holiday rush at my party supply business, I set it aside. A week later, Sherry came to the store. She talked to Mira and pointed at me. "I'm here to pick up my rental," she said, handing me the form. Male, good-looking chaperone for a Christmas party. Duties, good conversationalist, dancer, and kisser. Unable to dial phone numbers. Optional delivery. I was stunned. She was striking, about 5 feet 8 inches with a perfect figure. "I'll personally handle this rental, guaranteed," I said, shaking her hand. "It's a deal, but I expect satisfaction." She laughed, and we grabbed coffee to go over the details. Mira insisted on a new suit and dragged me to the mall. Her husband was amused by the spectacle. I tried on 8 suits before she found the one. The shirt, tie, socks, and even shoes took another 40 minutes. "You're not picking out my underwear too, are you?" I joked. "Dark blue silk boxers, done," she said without hesitation. "Remind me to fire you only if it comes with costume modeling," she replied. I was resigned. "Let's go home," I pleaded. "If you promise to cut your hair tomorrow," she teased, dressed to the nines. I rented a Cadillac Escalade for the weekend. When I picked up Sherry, she looked breathtaking in a shimmering green dress with a high slit and a plunging neckline, held up by double-sided tape. She was both bold and elegant. I helped her into the car, catching a glimpse of her guardians. We must have talked, but I remember none of it. At the party, she stole the spotlight constantly, asking to dance during a slow song. One partner got too close, and she grabbed my hand, pulling me away. "No more slow dances with anyone but you," she whispered. On the way home, she snuggled close, playfully nibbling my ear at stoplights. We kissed passionately until honking cars forced us to break apart. Before leaving her house, we ended up steaming the car windows. After about 20 minutes, she invited me inside for coffee. I sat on the couch while she changed, and when she reappeared, her outfit, or lack thereof, left me stunned. She noticed my silence and looked nervous. "Listen, I like you a lot. Normally I'd take things slow, dates, romantic build-up, candles, maybe chocolate, but I really like you. So let's skip the months and see how this mattress holds up," she said. 12 hours later, I left briefly to get breakfast, but otherwise, the Escalade stayed parked outside her house for 2 days. 2 months after that night, we moved in together, and 5 months later, we were married. We agreed to wait a few years before starting a family. She was 25, and I was 29. After 3 years, I started dropping hints about having kids, but about a year ago, things changed. Sherry's behavior became more demanding and materialistic. She wanted a bigger house, even though our 4-bedroom home was more than enough. Then she maxed out a credit card she had secretly opened. When I paid it off, I revoked her access to our finances. She didn't speak to me for days. Although she made a decent income, she was always broke. I covered all household expenses except for groceries, which she had agreed to handle. Her closet was overflowing with clothes and shoes, many of which were never worn. The silence following the credit card incident lasted 5 days. On the 6th day, I was clearing out her closet when she came home and watched me in stunned silence. "I'm not living like this anymore," I told her. "If I'm going to be alone, I'll live alone." "I called your mother. She agreed to let you stay with her for 2 weeks. By then, we'll find you a place. I'll cover the deposit, 2 months' rent, and set up the utilities. This is your chance to learn budgeting and living independently." Cher's eyes went wide with shock, and she fainted. I caught her, cooled her down with a damp cloth, and waited for her to come to. When she woke up, she looked confused. "I had the weirdest dream," she said weakly. "You were kicking me out." But when she saw the clothes on the bed and the suitcases on the floor, she began to cry and pleaded with me not to make her leave. "Please, I'll be better," she sobbed. After she calmed down, I told her to wash her face and join me in the kitchen. She sat across from me, avoiding eye contact. "I'm serious, sure," I said. "I can't keep living like this. Tantrums, reckless spending, refusing to talk about starting a family. It feels like I don't know you anymore. If you want to leave, say so. If not, things have to change." Sherry finally admitted that she was terrified of motherhood, haunted by memories of her childhood. She was the middle of 3 children, close in age, and often overlooked when her parents divorced. "When I was 12, it affected me deeply," she said. "I remember my mom crying, struggling alone with 3 teenagers. She started drinking and ignored us. My dad moved far away after New Year's. I don't want to put a child through that," she confessed. I held Sherry's hand tightly. "I'm sorry for what you went through," I said, "but I'm only talking about having 1 child for now. If we decide on another, we'll wait at least 2 years, and I promise I'll never leave you." We avoided serious conversations for weeks, but eventually fell back into our normal routine. Cher started cutting back on her spending and even opened a savings account. 3 months later, she showed me the balance, and I was genuinely impressed. "Don't get too proud," she joked. "It'll be gone soon." I assumed she meant she was planning to buy a new car, but then she surprised me. "I'm using it for nursery furniture," she said. "I want you to paint it light blue." "Ich zerte her, sunt." "What did you just say?" "We're having a son in 7 months," she announced with a warm smile. I never cried in front of her before, but at that moment, I couldn't help it. The sight startled her. "Did I do something wrong? Isn't this what you wanted?" she asked, concerned. Before she could say another word, I pulled her into my arms, covering her with kisses until we were both crying and laughing together. When we stepped outside, Mara, who worked next door, immediately noticed something was up. True to her nature, she blurted out, "What's going on? You two look like you just heard great news." "Mara, we're having a baby boy in 7 months," I said, but added, "Keep it quiet for now. We want to surprise my mom." "Sure," she replied with a knowing grin, already pulling out her phone as she walked away. I turned to Cher. "Did you tell your mom yet?" I asked. Sherry smiled knowingly. "I checked before I came in. The whole town will know by tonight." Telling Mira was the easiest way. As expected, people stopped us on the street to hug Sherry and shake my hand. When we returned to the store, we saw a huge banner strung across the front that read, "Congratulations to Will and Sherry, it's a boy." Mara stood nearby with a smirk. "Like I could keep that secret," she said with a wink. The pregnancy was tough. At 7 months, Sherry was put on bed rest, and I knew we wouldn't try for another child. It was too risky. Her mother moved in to help, the only one who could handle Sherry's moods. Labor lasted 17 hours before an emergency C-section. Exhausted, Sherry looked at me and whispered, "Never again." I agreed, and while Sherry was still in the hospital, she had her tubes tied. Our son, William Bryan Sanford, was nearly 9 pounds, explaining her pain. He had thick black hair like mine, and despite what the nurse said, it never fell out. Becoming a parent is indescribable, beautiful, and terrifying. Life shifts focus entirely to the child, and spontaneity becomes a memory. Even a simple grocery trip needs planning. Sure struggled more with motherhood than I expected. She loved Billy but always handed him over as soon as I got home, for her baby recovery time. Time I enjoyed holding him and talking about the future, Little League, camping, Boy Scouts. He'd smile and hum, fascinated by my face. Sherry was frustrated that he calmed down instantly with me. I took 2 weeks off to be home after Billy's birth. When I returned, Marrera and Charlie had put up a sign, Sanford and Son Equipment Rentals, no junk. It brought tears to my eyes. My friendship with the Hatfields developed over time. One day, Angie stopped by, hoping to rent a tractor for her garden. Why not? She asked, clearly surprised. Tractors can be dangerous if you don't know how to use them, I explained. Besides, you already have one in your shed. It won't start, she admitted. It's probably just the battery. I'll come by tomorrow and take a look at it, I offered. On Saturday, Sherry, Billy, and I visited the Hatfields. Angie held Billy for an hour while I worked on charging the tractor's battery. Bennett and I discussed where the best spot for the garden would be. Do you really want her using the tractor? Bennett asked, concerned. No, but she's determined to do it. I'll make sure she learns how to use it safely, I replied. Angie and Sherry brought out sandwiches and potato salad for lunch. After we ate, I showed Angie the basics of operating the tractor. The brakes, throttle, hydraulics, and gears. Keep in mind, tractor gears don't stall like a car's, I explained. Once you release the clutch, the tractor will move. If you're in a high gear on a slope, it could flip. That's why the collapsible roll bar and seatbelt are so important. Stay inside the bar, and even if you have a scare, you'll be safe. I had Angie put the tractor in low gear and guided her as she drove across the field. It moved so slowly that I could walk beside her, giving directions. I showed her how to use the hydraulic hitch and set up the rotary plow. Always start with equipment attached to avoid flipping on steep slopes. It's safer, I advised. She made a few passes with a big grin as Ben snapped pictures. She was disappointed when I parked the tractor and took the key, explaining, the battery is dead, and my friend will install a crossbar and seat belts on Tuesday. You'll get a new battery and keys then, but don't use it alone until Ben is home. Sherry was impressed by Angie's beautiful house and expensive art. Angie returned her job, which she enjoyed, and it kept her from going stir-crazy at home. We had fun teaching Angie to use the tractor. She planted her garden, bought a small cultivator, and cried when she picked her first beans. I warned her the garden might be too much, but she laughed. Ben works long hours, and I don't like watching TV. Plus, I need content for my blog. Her blog, Gone Country, chronicled her journey to country living. It was funny and popular, with photos and videos, often including me as her rural advisor. Angie wanted an organic garden, so I connected her with a friend for horse manure. She had to clean stalls to get it, but she embraced it, sharing photos of her crop uniform online. Sherry visited the Hatfields less frequently. I heard all about gardening and organic methods, bringing Billy with me each visit. Angie spent as much time with him as in the garden. One day, I asked her if she wanted kids. Yes, she said, but Ben's infertile due to a childhood issue. We considered adoption, but he wasn't comfortable. He's my soulmate, she said. So, I dropped it. Sometimes holding Billy makes her think about it until he needs a diaper change, she joked, handing him back. Ben later joined us and asked, will I need your help planning a business barbecue? You and Sherry will cook, and you will get paid. This is business, not just friendship. Agreed, I said, relieved they were serious. Angie coordinated everything, including supplies. I asked, how many people? 80 confirmed, but plan for a 100 no kids. I frowned. You're sending the wrong message. This is the South. Family is central. Invite spouses and kids for a personal touch. Call to confirm attendees and plan activities for the kids. A personal invitation makes a bigger impact. Angie called Ben immediately. Hold the invitations. We need names and contacts for the wives. I'll explain later, she said, looking at me surprised. Ever think about running for office? You'd win with the barbecue vote. I laughed. No, just lots of party experience. Angie's calls boosted attendance from 100 to nearly 300. We hired 3 neighborhood girls for service, and Sherry, Mara, and Charlie helped out. It was a warm day with a light breeze. I set up the gazebo as a dining room with fans to keep it cool. We served 400 pounds of pulled pork, 20 chickens, and 2 beef briskets for the Jewish guests, with labeled side dishes to ensure kosher options. The menu included potato salad, coleslaw, baked beans, zucchini casserole, grilled veggies from Angie's garden, and homemade cakes and brownies for the kids. We had chilled watermelon. Although exhausted, it was worth it. 420 people showed up, thanks to the kids joining. Charlie oversaw parking with the teenage helpers. Guests mingled for an hour before serving themselves to keep things casual. Booze was kept separate in a small tent and only opened an hour after the meal, with limits on excessive drinking set by the senior partners. Kids played loudly, enjoying the games and equipment. Angie and Ben were attentive hosts, moving between groups to ensure everyone was having fun. Men gathered to talk business, while women chatted under shaded trees with comfortable seating. Sherry looked elegant in her sundress, and Bun Drew complimented us on our dishes. We exchanged many business cards near the end, and everyone gathered in the dining tent for a short speech. The senior partner thanked everyone and praised Angie, Sherry, and me for hosting. He wrapped up unexpectedly quickly, urging everyone to take leftover food and enjoy the ice cream, which drew applause. The ice cream machines offered chocolate, banana, pineapple, blueberry, and vanilla, causing some ice cream headaches among the kids. Angie's garden was a hit. She frequently gave tours and handed out fresh produce. Her watermelons, used in a seed-spitting contest, were especially popular. Sherry was stunned when Angie handed her the check. The event had grown into a corporate celebration, and Ben hadn't covered the bill. We also received a 25% bonus from the senior partner with a thank you note. I shared part of the bonus with Charlie, Mara, and the helpers, giving the rest to Sherry. She earned it. Ben's firm mainly handled business law, and soon after the party, calls for event planning flooded in. The demand and profit were so high that we registered as a separate business. Sherry quit her job to manage it, and excelled quickly. Rentals came through us, so I promoted Mara to rental manager, and she hired her laid-off husband, Donnie. She's the boss at home and work. I'll never make a decision again, Donnie joked. Your fault, he added. Just think you're one of the few who gets to entertain their boss. I teased, cheering him up. Sherry began dressing more professionally and meeting clients in the evenings. We eventually bought her a Cadillac. Business boomed, especially in winter. Saturdays were spent working events, planning, or meeting clients. Sherry managed meetings while I handled logistics and food. The party business outpaced our rental income, but left us little time together. Things hit a breaking point when Sherry frequently stayed out late for meetings. I asked her to stop, but she insisted it was necessary. After 3 late Saturdays, I lost patience. I won't cook, coordinate, or help with any event that costs us time together, I said. I thought we were partners, I added. She shouted, I want a husband and wife partnership too. Decide what matters more, the business or us. Ignoring her grumbling, I went to comfort Billy, who woke up from the noise. True to my word, I didn't help with the next event, and it went poorly. The clients disliked the food and service, leaving no bonus and criticizing Sherry's reputation. She had treated me coldly until then, but came out waving a white handkerchief on Sunday as a truce. I fed Billy breakfast. I said firmly, no truce, only a full surrender. Meet my conditions or we're done. No negotiation. I picked up Billy. We're going to visit Ben and Angie. We'll be back in an hour. Angie adored Billy and often volunteered to babysit during our events. She was thrilled as Billy started learning to talk and walk, especially when he managed to say her name. Billy would also try to follow Bennett around, calling out his name eagerly. One day, Bennett approached me about an old race car stored in the barn. Anderson doesn't drive this, but he's sponsored it, he said. The engine's blown, but the frame and transmission are still intact.
Can it be fixed? He asked.
It would need a new engine and some parts, I explained. It can't just be repaired. It would need a complete rebuild. What's got you so interested? I asked. Bennett blushed slightly. I've always loved NASCAR and have dreamed of driving a race car. And how does Angie feel about that? I asked. She's a bit hesitant, he admitted, but she agreed to watch one race with me. It's safe, right? Relatively safe, I said. There haven't been any passaways that I know of, but injuries can happen. Start with beginner races and build your experience from there. We fixed up the car, and Ben took lessons from veteran racers. Soon he was racing every Friday night at the local dirt track. Sherry and I patched things up, and we went to watch him. It was loud and dusty, but Ben was clearly enjoying himself with Charlie and local teens as his pit crew. Rules were relaxed, so we joined them in the pit. Ben led the race, but slowed down and drove into the pit, weakened from a week-long flu. The race looked lost, affecting his points for the championship. Charlie pointed out he could use a substitute. The cage fits someone Ben's size, are smaller, Charlie said, looking at Angie. I don't know anything about racing, she protested. You just need to shift gears and stay behind the pack, I explained. Ben will get credit for finishing. Ben urged her. Do it, honey. Just be careful. Angie hesitated, then said, Give me a helmet, but not a word if I crash. We buckled her in and told her to stay low and keep a steady pace. She sped off, gravel flying. The first 15 laps went smoothly until a rival aiming to knock her out to improve his standings targeted her. He clipped her car and Angie shouted, What's he doing? Into the headset. He's trying to take you out. Next time, brake when he approaches and then hit the gas, I told her. She did it perfectly, causing him to tangle with other cars. He caught up later and managed to slam her into the wall. The caution light flashed and Angie pitted, throwing her helmet into the car. Can you fix it? She yelled. We can't fix it in time, I said. Fired up, she ordered. Rip the fender off and get me back out. I'm putting him into the wall. Charlie and I did as she asked. I warned her. Don't be reckless. Watch him closely. Back in the race, Angie drove aggressively, dodging and speeding past cars. When her rival approached, I shouted, Cut left now. She swerved, causing him to crash into another car, and chaos ensued. She passed him, finishing third after regaining ground, though her lost laps put her in 7th place. The rival ended up last as he approached the pit. Angie got out, pulled off her helmet, and taunted, How does it feel to get beat by a girl? She patted her back and laughed, hugging Ben. The rival looked furious, but before he could react, I stepped in. Choose your words carefully. She beat you fair and square. Learn from it. Ben soon got the car fixed and started racing at the local dirt track every Friday. Sure, and I made up and we went to watch him race. It was loud and dusty, but Ben loved it. Charlie and local teens were his pit crew, and the relaxed rules let us join them. Ben led the race but slowed and pulled into the pit, weakened by the flu. He risked losing his points lead. Charlie mentioned he could use a substitute, and we all looked at Angie. I don't know anything about racing, she protested. You just need to stay in the race, I said. Ben encouraged her. Do it, honey, be careful. She agreed, saying, Give me a helmet, but not a word if I crash. She drove, staying steady, but a rival, trying to knock her out, bumper car Angie. She yelled into the headset, Brake when he gets close, then accelerate. I advised, and she followed the plan, causing the rival to tangle with other cars. He caught up again and slammed her into the wall. Angie pitted, angry but determined. Rip the fender off and get me back in, she demanded. We did, warning her to be cautious. She drove hard, avoiding another bump and finishing 7th, which kept Ben ahead in points. The rival finished last. When Angie got out, she taunted him. How does it feel to be beaten by a girl? And laughed. I stepped in when he looked angry. Be polite. She beat you fair and square. Angie got hooked on racing and used her trust fund to buy a car. Racing in the women's division, she won twice. Ben won his points trophy, and they planned for the next season with matching cars, featuring sponsors' logos, including ours. Sure, and I shared little except Billy. Business was booming, and we had 2 crews. Sure dressed better, became more confident, and spent less time with Billy and me. She joined a professional women's group and attended regular meetings. I was proud when she won an award, but noticed her friend's look of surprise when I was introduced as her husband. I joked about a city husband, and Sherry's embarrassed reaction fell off. Ben's boss called, wanting a party to celebrate Ben's birthday and racing win. I agreed to cook, suggesting they provide sides and desserts. When I told Sherry, she said she couldn't come due to a prior event. They're friends, I said. Just show up, check on things, and come back. I set up the event, and Ben and I made parking easier with a path through the woods, connecting our properties. The party was lively, but Sherry called saying she'd be an hour late. We ran low on ice, so I took Ben's car to get more but ran out of gas halfway and had to walk near the house. I saw a couple on the couch through the open blinds. I thought kids had broken in, as break-ins had been happening, but as I prepared to call emergency, I realized it was Sherry with a young employee from Ben's office. My first instinct was to storm in, but I remembered what my lawyer friend had taught me before moving here. Ben had worked as a divorce attorney. I hated it, he said. Divorces are messy, especially when infidelity or violence is involved. It's hard for anyone to stay logical, and often the guy loses out, especially if violence is alleged. Nobody wins, especially with kids involved. Only the lawyers profit. Seeing my wife with another man was unbearable. I was ready to burst in, but I remembered Ben's advice and forced myself to calm down. I walked down the path and called Ben. Hey, buddy, what's taking so long? Should I send Angie over? He asked. No, but I need Angie here now, I said, trying to steady my voice. I just saw her at the house with someone else, barely dressed. I need a witness and a divorce lawyer. Can you help? Angie, who had been listening nearby, stepped in with concern. Are you sure? She asked, eyes wide. I wouldn't be asking if I wasn't, I replied. Within 20 minutes, Angie, Ben, and 2 of his partners' wives arrived. I showed them the photos I'd taken. Julie, one of the women, spoke up. I'm a divorce lawyer.
I can help you, she said.
My practice is independent, and I'll advise you and offer my services. Angie comforted me, reminding me of Billy. Julie instructed, stay calm and let me handle this. Don't talk to them, it's your advantage. Ben called ahead, they're almost here, let's go. They set up the confrontation. The senior partner arrived at my driveway, pretending to pick up ice. The group waited on the deck, avoiding the light. We heard a knock. Sherry will send us for ice, we're out, he said loudly, using the key when there was no response inside. Sherry and her lover scrambled to dress. He ran to the deck, thinking he was hidden, but I turned on the outdoor light. The man's stunned face was captured by 4 cell phones as he stood holding his clothes. Sherry, now dressed, saw us from the kitchen and screamed before running out. The partner addressed the man. Be in my office at 9 o'clock Monday. Now go. Authority was clear. Angie and Ben sat with me, holding my hands. Julie gave me her number and told me to be at her office at 2 o'clock on Monday. She hugged me before we returned to the party, which ended early. I spent the night in their guest room, unable to sleep. The next morning, Angie woke me by sending Billy to me. There's no sleeping when a 2-year-old needs you, I realized. I hadn't considered Billy's safety. Angie picked him up early, telling my mother-in-law I was too busy, and she offered to help. Billy fed Angie breakfast, getting syrup everywhere, which made her smile as she cleaned him up. Later, Ben and I talked. Angie asked, divorce? Yes. We stopped sharing dreams. She wants city life, I replied. I'm a country guy, and Billy? Angie asked. I want full custody. He doesn't fit her lifestyle, Ben warned. She might fight for custody to gain leverage and a better settlement. Julie, a divorce lawyer, advised, stay calm and let me handle it. Don't confront her. 6 days later, Sherry showed up at the house. I resisted throwing her out. Please, I'm just here to get my things and see Billy, then I'll leave, she said. I let her play with Billy, who seemed uninterested. She asked for her keys to get clothes from the trunk, then started her car. I grabbed the keys and pulled Billy out as she screamed and cursed. Angie recorded everything. Approaching on her four-wheeler, Sherry shouted insults, accusing Angie of infidelity. I interrupted. Leave, Sherry. Any future visits need court approval. Get out before I call the police. Angie documented everything. The next day, Julie filed for an injunction and a psychiatric evaluation for Sherry, using the recorded outburst as evidence. Sherry's lover, now her partner, lost his job over the affair and moved to a lower-paying firm. I informed clients I was stepping away from the business, but would complete current contracts. Julie advised against quitting entirely, saying it protected my reputation and ensured Sherry had an income. Sherry demanded the house still in my parents' name and the party equipment, which she couldn't afford per the prenup. Julie froze our accounts, allowing withdrawals only for payroll and supplies. Profits went to a new account controlled by Sherry. It was the fairest deal possible. Sherry struggled until accepting the terms. Her lawyer, the fifth man she'd been involved with in 18 months, pushed for a last meeting, which I declined. I stayed civil for Billy, who barely missed her. Sherry kept the party business, giving me a fourth of the profits. Julie ensured she got the business and some capital, her only payout for me. I was awarded full custody of Billy, and she had generous visitation rights. I never refused her visits, but she had to follow the rules. No one could be around when she had Billy. If she ever exposed him to anything morally or physically unsafe, she would lose her rights. After a year, the visits gradually became less frequent. Billy didn't seem to mind. Angie and Ben became my support system, helping me navigate my grief and anger. Cher's mom continued to babysit Billy, agreeing that if she helped Cher break the custody agreement, all contact with Billy would stop. Angie became a surrogate with Ben's approval. Billy still followed Ben everywhere at work. Ben kept a photo of himself, Angie, and Billy on his desk. People assumed Billy was his stepson, and he let them think so to a certain extent. Ben initially approached me for permission, explaining that presenting himself as a family man helped attract new clients. I surprised him by handing him a copy of my will, naming him and Angie as executors and guardians for Billy in case anything happened to me. "Ben, you already are a family man," I said. "You always have been. You've got the most remarkable woman I've ever met, and you have us." I never seen a male lawyer cry before. It was a touching moment in time. I dated a few women, they were fun and met my needs, but I never found anyone who felt like a long-term partner. Angie would often scold me, insisting that Billy needed a mother. I would just look at her and say, "He has one, and when I find the right one for him, I'll marry her so fast it'll make your head spin." The closest I came was with a lawyer, the senior partner's daughter. She was a few years older, recently divorced, and had just secured a great job on the opposite coast. She was taking 3 months off to recover from her past and needed an escort. Her father called me one day and said, "Do me a favor. She's new in town, and I want her to attend the banquet with me, but she needs an escort. She's quite beautiful, if that helps." I had no other plans, so I agreed. I rented a Cadillac for the evening, and the familiarity of it felt like déjà vu. Was she beautiful? Absolutely. She stood barely 5 foot tall, blonde, fair-skinned, and perfectly proportioned, like a living porcelain doll. I felt a spark of interest, and I think she sensed it too, because her playful side came out. "Ooh, a real-life redneck. I've never been this close to one before. Do you bite?" she teased. I gave her a serious look, and she replied with a mischievous smile. "Yes, perfect." Then Angie and her parents laughed, setting a light, cheerful tone for the evening. It was a prestigious black-tie charity event, and I thought I looked quite sharp in my formal wear. The food was exceptional, and Rhonda, my date, talked to incessantly throughout the meal. Later, she admitted it was because she was nervous. She had comments for the appetizer, main course, and dessert. "Do you ever stop talking?" I teased. She blushed and smiled innocently, "Only when there's something interesting in my mouth." Ben choked on his coffee, and Angie burst out giggling. "Come on, you two. This is serious business," I said with a grin. An orchestra began to play, and people started dancing. Thanks to Angie's lessons, I felt confident enough to take the floor. "Sophie, My dance partner was remarkable, graceful, smooth, and mesmerizing. She danced with her father twice, and with Ben once, but spent the rest of the night in my arms. As Ben and I waited by the bandstand for the women to return, Sherry walked by. "Ben, good to see you both," she said. "Are you here alone?" Her tone sharp. She turned to me. "You should really socialize more. Let me introduce my date, Robert Morgan. You might know his father, Ben Wilson Morgan, founder of the Morgan Bank chain." Sherry looked worn and had put on some weight. A quick glance at her date revealed he was there more for show than conversation. Just then, Angie and Sophie rejoined us, and Sophie kissed me on the cheek. "Did you miss me, darling?" she asked. "Good. I want you to sulk all night, so it'll be even better when we make that wild, passionate love you promised me," Sophie said with playful exaggeration. "Oh, I'm sorry. Who are your friends?" she added, turning to Sherry and Robert. Angie, stifling laughter, had clearly told Sophie about Sherry and set the scene. "Where are my manners?" I said. "Sophie, this is Robert Morgan of the Morgan banking family, and this is Sherry Blankenship," I emphasized, as I had insisted she revert to her maiden name. "A local businesswoman and my ex-wife. Robert, this is Sophie Williams from the firm of Williams, Roberts, and Hatfield. You might have heard of them. Well, my dear, shall we waltz?" We left Sherry and Robert speechless as we danced. I leaned in and whispered, "Angie told you who she was, didn't she?" Sophie leaned closer, her eyes glinting. "Yes, and some background too. Don't worry, she's having a rough day, but from the looks of it, so are they." We finished the dance, and Sophie pulled me in for a long, deep kiss. "Did she see that?" I asked, catching my breath. "Yes, she did," she said with a sly smile. "You're welcome. It was my pleasure." Later, Robert approached Sophie to ask her for a dance, and Sherry turned to me for old time's sake. Sherry asked, and Sophie answered with a sweet but firm smile. "I'd love to, but I promise my partner all my dances." "Sorry, Sherry. Maybe another time." Angie struggled to contain her laughter as Sherry and Robert walked away without a word. I turned to Sophie. "I'm glad you're not here permanently," I said. She looked at me, visibly hurt. "Why say something so mean? I'm starting to like you because wherever we'd go, there'd be fights constantly. I'd be fending off men, and you'd be fighting to keep me close." She smiled slowly. "What makes you think I'd resist?" She didn't hold back, and we spent every spare moment together. Angie even kept Billy, so we could have weekends alone. She was the best lover I'd ever had. Despite her small frame, she was surprisingly strong. She never shared her age, but I guess she was in her 40s, with the firmness and agility of someone in their 20s. She said the old folks called it a round trip, and I was racking up those frequent flyer miles. She adored Billy and showed me pictures of her daughter, a 13-year-old spitting image of her. "My ex has her now," she said. I gave him extra time, since soon we'd be 3,000 kilometers apart. Thinking about Billy being so far away made me sad, but life moves on. To pass the time, I opened a barbecue restaurant. Mira was still renting and thriving, so I didn't interfere. Restaurants demand a lot of time, and their success rates are low, but my good reputation helped, and I succeeded. I bought 4 food trucks, fitted them out, and sent them to nearby towns 4 days a week. They did exceptionally well. I still hadn't found anyone permanent in my life, and had pretty much given up looking. It happens when you least expect it, when you love your life and are truly content. I'm not talking about love, I mean tragedy. Billy was 9, and would get off the bus at Angie's and ride his little 4-wheeler through the woods. When I got home, she would ride with him, wave to me, and walk back. She'd give him a snack, check his schoolwork, and he'd help around the house. It worked for all of us. On the rare nights I had a date, he'd stay over at Angie's, where she had a room ready for him. At 3 o'clock, he called me crying. "Come quick, Daddy. Angie is on the floor crying, and I can't get her up." I rushed over, and just as he had said, I found Angie on the floor, quietly sobbing and unresponsive. I was reaching for my phone to call emergency when Ben's boss called. "Will, I need you to check on Angie. I'm with her now, and she's not okay, he said, sounding urgent. She's not talking to me. This isn't like her, I replied, hearing the strain in his voice. Ben is dead, he said. He had a heart attack, and they said it was almost instant. We found him at his office when he missed a lunch meeting. He'd been gone for an hour. I nearly dropped my phone. Ben was gone. He was my best friend, but he was everything to Angie. I pulled her into my arms. Her face cleared for a moment, and she clung to me desperately. Ben. I held her on the couch, rocking her like a child. We both shed tears. She was in shock. We finalized the funeral arrangements after his boss brought us his will, which he had recently updated. He wanted to be cremated and have his ashes spread around the farm. This is the only place I ever felt at home, he wrote. An incredible group attended the visitation and service. Clients who became friends, racetrack buddies in full force, and all his firm's members and staff. Sherry came and hugged Angie, who sat with Billy on her lap, and Sherry's mom by her side. They had grown close over Billy. Angie's eyes followed me around, worried whenever I was out of sight. Ben was 52, older than Angie, and seemed healthy. The doctor said it was an underlying condition with no clear cause. After the funeral, friends and family returned to their routines, and it was time for mourning. Billy, Sarah Scher's mom, and I stayed with Angie for about 2 weeks. By the end of the second week, she began to revive. There was a brief moment of pain when the will was read, making it final. Ben had included letters, his way of saying goodbye. Angie received one I never asked, and she never shared its contents. Another letter was for Billy, to be opened on his 18th birthday. There was one for me, too. Dear Will, if you're reading this, I'm gone. Thank you for your friendship. You turned an uptight Yankee lawyer into someone who could relax and enjoy life. I was proud to call you a friend. I left a college fund for Billy, enough for full tuition. I know you can cover it, but I wanted to do this for both of you. He's a great kid. I hope, with your guidance, he becomes an even better man and remembers me fondly. Now, for the important part, take care of her. She'll need you for a while. I know you loved her, and in your honor and our friendship, you never crossed a line. Angie will need someone who loves her to help through the tough days ahead. I wish I could be there. I'd love to see Billy grow up. Find someone for yourself before you give up. Thank you for being who you are and for being my friend, Ben. Most of his estate, his farm and investments, went to Angie. He left the racetrack he cherished and funds to upgrade the grandstands, build an announcer's booth, and improve the PA system. The track was renamed in his honor. For a year, Angie tried to find a normal life, but eventually gave up. I'm moving to Philadelphia for a while. I can't stay here. Everywhere I look, I see him. Billy, though, cried for 2 days. I shed my tears alone. Angie had been my rock for 8 years, and I had never felt more lost than alone. She gave us the keys and asked us to watch over the farm. Every 2 or 3 weeks, I'd visit, start her small tractor to keep it running, and check the house, making sure the lights and plumbing were okay. She left the power on and installed a top-notch security system. I continued focusing on Billy, who was at the age where he wanted to hang out with friends. I knew it wouldn't be long before he outgrew me. Our house became the go-to spot for his friends, with at least 3 of his close buddies there at any time. I made it a point to know them and their parents, inviting them over and talking with them during pickups. Some of the moms were divorced, and I dated 1 or 2 casually. They wanted more, especially one, but I wasn't serious. I was in good shape, owned everything outright, and ran 2 thriving businesses. I opened a franchise restaurant, expanding to 4 locations across the state, each with at least 3 trucks serving nearby towns. Business was booming. I found another small town in need of equipment and opened another store. Myra's husband managed it, finally able to stop entertaining his boss except when he chose to. Sherry's business declined. She didn't get the favorable equipment deals she used to. Her chef left to start her own place, and business dwindled until she had to close. She took a job as an office manager at a large insurance firm and married a lawyer. It lasted 18 months before he caught her cheating. She's still working and now engaged again. I hope it lasts. She still visits Billy mostly for holidays and birthdays. I was exhausted, working out of town to open my 6th restaurant. Sarah stayed with Billy while I was away, and when I returned, they greeted me with wide smiles. "What's up?" I glanced down, checking my fly. "We have a visitor come in." It was Angie. She rushed into my arms, crying and hugging me. We spoke at least once a month, and I always heard the sadness in her voice. I always ended by asking her to come home. "How long will you stay?" I asked hopefully. "Another 30 or 40 years. "I'm home, and I'm not leaving," she replied. "I'm tired of parks, just to see grass. Tired of living next to people I don't know or care to. I want to see stars, not smog, at night." She took my hand. "I want to see you and Billy every day. I can't believe how tall he's gotten. He'll be taller than you soon. I want to see Marera, the guys at the driving range, all my real friends." By then, she was crying on my shoulder, and I just held her, feeling truly happy for the first time in 2 years. We tidied up her house, and week by week, she grew stronger, riding her tractor and working in the garden, regaining her energy. Sarah moved into a nearby nursing home with a 1-bedroom apartment. She was taken aback when she was upgraded to a larger unit, and even more surprised when I told her to send her bills to me. She protested, but I stood firm. "I'm taking care of it," I said. "You've been there for Billy and me countless times. This is payback. You deserve a bigger space, so Billy can visit comfortably. A happy grandma is what he needs." End of discussion. We shared dinners every night, alternating between our homes. 3 months later, Angie and I started going out together, movies, concerts, even some dancing. One visit to Ben's old firm left her in tears, though. They always invited us to their events, but Angie denied we were dating, saying we were just old friends. One evening, as we sat on the porch swing watching Billy and his friends ride their 4-wheelers, I stopped the swing and turned to her. "Marry me?" I said. What she replied, stunned. "Marry me. I've loved you for years." "You love me, even if you won't admit it. Let's stop this back and forth and settle down." Tears went up in her eyes. "But our age, I know you're 50 and I'm 43. "I don't care," she said. "I love you, and I will until the day I die." She sat there sniffling. "This feels like an ultimatum," she said. "Marry me, or I swear on Ben's memory, I'll never come back here. Yes or no right now." She remained silent, and my heart sank. I started to get up, but then I felt her hand grab mine. We lost our balance and tumbled down the steps, just as Billy ran over. He helped Angie up as she wiped away her tears. "Are you okay?" he asked. "Yes, sweetheart," she replied. "I just got some great news. In a few days or weeks, I'm officially going to be your mom. I hope that makes you happy," she said, smiling through her tears. That day, I realized just how incredible my son was. "You've always been my mom," Billy said, his voice steady. "Now I can finally say it. I love you, Mom." The wedding and reception were talked about for years. Mara did an outstanding job. We married in the spring, outdoors in a meadow on the farm, with a castle tent for the reception. Most of Ben's old colleagues came, and Sophie, visiting her parents, also attended. She hugged Angie and remarked how lucky she was. I knew from her expression I had some explaining to do. Friends from the racetrack restored Angie's car and presented it as a wedding gift. Years passed in happiness. Billy graduated college, married, and started a business with his wife. We gifted them my old house after a full renovation. They blessed us with 3 grandchildren, and their son was named Bennett. Angie sometimes grew pensive, thinking of Ben on their 50th anniversary. I surprised her with an oil portrait of him by a renowned artist. She cried for 2 hours before we hung it above the fireplace. With a fire crackling and Angie playing with our youngest granddaughter, I could almost swear the portrait of Ben was smiling.